You didn't tell me you were from South Carolina, did you?
No.
Yeah, anyway you like, we're going to be full.
Sorry, I won't read your one.
Thank you. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to Congress Hall. Welcome to Independence National Park. Welcome to Philadelphia. Philadelphia, that is my city. But for the next 15 minutes or so, it's going to be our city. The year is 1790. Philadelphia. We are the largest, the most educated, the most sophisticated, the most cosmopolitan city in the entire continent of North America. Somebody guess how many people we have in Philadelphia. Take a wild guess. 100,000 is a great guess. We had 40,000. Look at some of our condominiums today. I think there's 40,000 per building. You are in the original House of Representatives. We're in the lower chamber. Upstairs, 34 steps, is the Senate. That's the upper chamber. Unfortunately, because of COVID, we cannot visit the Senate. The area is just too small to accommodate this many people. Lower chamber, upper chamber. People think that means that the House of Representatives, the lower chamber, has less authority than the Senate, the upper chamber. That's not true at all. The Senate and the House of Representatives have equal power. Different jurisdictions, to be sure, but they are of equal power. So when you hear the term lower chamber and the term upper chamber, it has nothing to do with power. It has everything to do with the 34 steps in the city of Philadelphia, in the original House of Representatives, lower chamber, the original Senate, upper chamber. Look at the balcony. Everybody's looking. Well, why are we looking at the balcony? Looks like every other balcony. But it's actually very important. Everything that happened in this building, in this room, between 1790 and 1800 was open to the public. Full and transparent governance. We can't go to the Senate, like I said, but they have a similar balcony. So if you were walking down Chestnut Street in 1793 and you wanted to see what was going on in the House of Representatives, all you had to do was walk in, take a seat, listen. Full transparency in government. So what happened here? Well, I'll tell you a few of the important things. When we got to this room, we had 13 states. They were aligned from New Hampshire in the north to Georgia in the south, all hugging the eastern seaboard. The ink on the Declaration of Independence wasn't dry, and the country was already spreading westward. We added 3 new states from this building. First state we added was Vermont, number 14, of course, a northern state. New York and Vermont had territorial disputes. You know how those New Yorkers are. We had to settle them in this room. Vermont came into the Union. Country was going westward. I teach it this way, 56 men, no ladies signed the Declaration of Independence. One guy had 18 children with one wife. She died when she was 56, can't imagine why. And 11 men had 10 children. Colonial families were often very large, infant mortality was very high. The country was already spreading westward before the ink on the Declaration of Independence was dry. We added state number 15, Kentucky, and state number 16, Tennessee, from this building. When we got to this building, we had 13 different currencies, 13 different coinages. Hey guys, if you lived in Delaware, where our president is from, you could walk across the street to Pennsylvania, you had to change your money. If you lived in New York and you walked across the street, which you can do easily, you had to change your money. If you lived in New Jersey, where are my New Jersey people? You're here somewhere. These guys like to pay taxes. If you lived in New Jersey and you walked into Pennsylvania, guys, what would happen? You would drown. The Delaware River. As soon as you get across the river, you had to change your money. What's all this talk about? Doing business was impossible. If anybody was lucky enough to travel in Europe before the euro, if you visited Italy, you got lira. If you went to Greece, you changed it to drachma. You went to Germany, you changed it to Deutschmarks, and so forth and so on. And every time you changed your money, you came out a loser. We united that all into one currency, one coinage. We organized our financial house. We opened the first U.S. bank on 3rd Street. The bank cannot be visited inside. It's being renovated, or restored is a better word. The outside is a beautiful building. We opened the Philadelphia Mint, the U.S. Mint, 3 blocks from here, still doing business today, making coins. In this building, what else happened here? We had no political parties. The founding fathers did not want political parties. They said all that it's going to do is get everybody into trouble and aggravation. And boy, were they right. But they came anyway. The first 2 political parties were the Federalists, largely a New England wealthier party. The second one was called the Democrat Republicans. They took both names. They were not taking any chances of losing. Both parties have long since disappeared. Political parties, the fact of American life, started in this room. We got to this. Anybody here been to Disney World, Disneyland? Mm-hmm. Remember Pirates of the Caribbean? Yeah. We didn't have that. We had the Pirates of North Africa. Anybody here in the Navy or a Navy vet? Navy. Yeah, good thought so. I can tell by the anger. Yeah. We didn't have the Pirates, and they thank you for your service. We didn't have the Pirates of the Caribbean. We had the Pirates of North Africa, the Barbary Pirates. They caught one of our sailors. The sailor was enslaved. George Washington did not want a navy. He said, all that is going to do is get us involved with Europe and all their aggravation. We needed a navy to protect our commercial interests. The navy, your navy, was established in this room, 1791. The first commander or commodore of the Navy was Commodore Barry. His statue was right outside the exit gate of the park. 1787, the Constitution of the United States is written. In Independence Hall, 2 doors down. In our country, we have had one Constitution in over 200 years. When the Europeans start visiting us again, I talk about their countries, with the exception of England, which never had a formal written constitution like we have. They had a series of laws dating back to 1215. Almost every other country has had multiple constitutions. I often joke, they change constitutions like I go to the refrigerator. This country, one constitution. In over 2 centuries, 27 formal amendments, one constitution, thousands of interpretations. The Constitution is signed in Independence Hall, 1787. Freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of religion, right to assembly, which we see all over the place now, often with disastrous results. Right to trial by jury in certain cases, right against self-incrimination, which means you can't testify against yourself in a criminal trial. Be forced to testify against yourself in a criminal trial. Right against unreasonable searches and seizures, whatever that means. Right against cruel and unusual punishment, whatever that means. And the endless discussion and the never-ending controversy over the Second Amendment, the right to bear arms. Ratified when Philadelphia was the capital. This room, this building, 1791. The colonial map, New Hampshire in the north, Georgia in the south, all states hugging the Atlantic Ocean. Even New Hampshire, just 16 miles of it, a beach, but still hugging the Atlantic Ocean. We were surrounded by enemies. England, they were in France, waiting for a rematch. They got it, the War of 1812, France. France was our oldest ally. But we weren't friends anymore. Sounds familiar. They tried to bribe us. The XYZ affair. We would have gone to war with France, but for the intervention of John Adams. They were in Canada, Spain. By the late 1700s, the Spanish Empire was clearly in decline, but they were a force to be reckoned with, largely in Florida and the western part of the country, Mississippi. The Second Amendment, we had a very small army. The Second Amendment, militias could be raised. Each of you can draw any conclusion you see fit, but you have to trace your thinking back to this room. All that's important, but let me tell you what I think might be the most important thing. 1788 is a free and fair election for President of the United States. Everybody knows who won. Who was it? He had cherry tree issues. George Washington. 1792, he runs for election. Of course, he wins again. We're up to 1796. The powers that be said, Mr. Washington, please be president again. He said nothing doing. He started a tradition of two-term presidents, only broken one time. Anybody knows who did it?
FDR.
Of course, Roosevelt, 1932, 36, 40, and 44. Now it's a constitutional amendment. In those days, it was a tradition. There was an election for president, a free and fair election. John Adams, Massachusetts, wins. It is March 1797. Walking out of that door, the same door that we just walked in, George Washington, retired President of the United States, directly behind him, John Adams. Vice President under Washington, second President of the United States, directly behind him, Thomas Jefferson. Third President of the United States, primary author of the Declaration of Independence, Vice President under Adams, will become the third President of the United States, a peaceful, coherent transfer of executive power. Peaceful and open. Walking out of that door in Philadelphia. That was pretty heavy, so let me lighten it up a little bit. Oh, by the way, I forgot to mention, John Adams was sworn in right here for his one term as president. George Washington was sworn in upstairs for his second term as president in the Senate. First term was sworn in New York. Before I get to a little anecdotal history, let me talk about something serious. Everybody here see the Liberty Bell? Liberty Bell's strong. To me, it represents America, our constitutional democracy. Look at the crack and the jagged edges of the crack. To me, that indicates our system is not perfect. Nobody ever suggested that it was. Independence Hall, 1787. The Constitution is signed. A slave was 3/5 of a person. A slave didn't have the rights of 3/5 of a person. A slave had no rights. A slave was 3/5 of a person to count representation in this room. It gave the Southerners an increased population base. Maryland, North Carolina, South Carolina, Virginia, Georgia, slave states had increased representation in this room. So what we did in 1787, we took an atomic bomb and shoved it under the rug for the time being. Gets worse. 1791, we're now in this room. We passed a law called the Fugitive Slave Act. Very complicated, but I'll simplify it to the extent that I can. That law said it is illegal to help a slave run away to his or her freedom. So if a slave escaped bondage and went into your state, New Jersey, a major state on the Underground Railroad. Underground Railroad has nothing to do with metros or subways. It was a methodology by which Northerners helped slaves escape to their freedom. If they came into Philadelphia, perhaps the major stop on the Underground Railroad, or they got to New York or Connecticut, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, New Hampshire, or into Canada, anywhere in this country, slave hunters could grab that slave and take him or her back to bondage. The atom bomb that we kicked under the rug in 1787, we gave it another shove in 1791. It's 1861, the Civil War. Our country is torn to pieces. More Americans died in the Civil War than in all of our other armed conflicts combined, partly because of the failure in Philadelphia. In this room, the Liberty Bell's there. When it is cracked, nobody ever suggested that our system is perfect. Anecdotal history, that's heavy stuff. In the early days, the person who ran for president who got the most electoral college votes became president. The runner-up became vice president. Everybody rewind a little bit, 2016. Could anybody imagine if we still had that system? Early on, we realized that was probably a terrible idea. Now, of course, the presidential nominee, his or her party, gets to pick his or her running mate. It's July 4th, 1826. We just flew through 50 years of American history. Left out a few details. That's okay. John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, second president and third president. They were the best of friends. They became mortal enemies. They died on the exact same day, July 4th, 1826. Guys, look at the bus up there, not that handsome guy standing in the door. Look at the bus. Anybody recognize him? Come on, Luke, give us a smile. That's right, Benjamin Franklin. I don't know about this crowd. I asked this question rhetorically. You think he was smiling?
I didn't think so.
I do. The experiment in constitutional democracy was working. Flawed like the Liberty Bell, to be sure, but it was working. Guys, thank you for your visit. Have a wonderful day in our city.
Oh, no, yeah. Let yourself out.
Thank you.
Take care. Okay, folks, if I have anybody with this is about a 20 or so minute long tour. We're going to make 2 stops. There will be tours in front of it, behind us, so just stay with me. I'll get you to see all the places. Now, you are welcome to take photographs. That includes flash and video, and obviously that includes your phone. If you have a phone, just have it silenced while we're inside. Would be appreciated. Please no eating or drinking. If you have food or drink, just keep it closed up while you're inside. And also, you do have to have a mask on inside, which kind of makes the whole eating drinking thing a little difficult as well. When we're inside, we're going to the back door. There's a couple steps up, so please watch your step. There's a ramp if you need it as well. That's about all I have to say. If you guys want to follow me, we're going to come on in.
What else?
Watch your step, please. Up the hall, room on the left. Well, welcome to Independence Hall. My name is Matt. I'm one of the Rangers here, and I will be showing you guys around today for about the next 20 minutes. So first and foremost, let's talk about the building. This building next year will be 290 years old. Construction begins in 1732 on a building that they called the Pennsylvania State House. It was one of the largest buildings in America for its day, which I know you weren't thinking skyscraper when you looked at our bell tower, but yeah, one of the biggest, tallest, grandest buildings in the colonies. Now, as it goes, Independence Hall is going to be the capital of Pennsylvania until 1800. As the capital, the governor would have been upstairs. The assembly, which is the elected lawmakers in Pennsylvania, were across the hall. Supreme Court of Pennsylvania was in here, and I'll talk a little bit about this room in a second. Now, in 1800, as we were growing to the west beyond the United States, we move our state capital, eventually out to Harrisburg. When the state government leaves, the building will be sold to the city of Philadelphia, and the city's going to use it as City Hall up until the 1890s. So not much more than 100 years ago, this is a government building. It's always been. However, it's also a historical place. Obviously, that's why we're all here today. So in maybe the 1820s, the United States is 50 years old. We're thinking about our history for the first time. And this is one of the very first places that people come to see. And as they come to visit, they start to call it Independence Hall. It's like a nickname, that's what we all call it today. So today, the idea is we want the building to look like it did in the 1700s. That's one of the goals we had in the 20th century. So we have the original bricks outside. We have the original woodwork walls inside. That helped us to tell the story, because these walls were always here, but they were always painted and not always painted the same color. So by the 20th century, there were places that had 200 years of paint on the walls. And in some places, that's more than 30 layers. And we were able to go down through those layers of paint and find and match the old colors. And so what you're seeing is as close as we can get to the colors that, Benjamin Franklin saw. And every room is a different color than the one next to it. So you may ask me why they painted this Pennsylvania Supreme Court room orange. And my answer is I have no idea, but this is the color they painted it. So there you go. Now the furniture, the way the rooms are set up, there is a bit more guesswork involved. Because again, over the years, all these rooms were used for different things. So they didn't save all the tables and platforms. That would change. So the first part is, well, we know basically what a courtroom looks like. And we know what a courtroom in the 1700s looks like. It's a little different than what we might think it looks like. So that's a starting point. Now we also know more or less the kind of furniture that was here. Now nobody saved furniture for the future in 1776. Nobody wrote floor plans and seating charts. Nobody was keeping track of who sat where. So we don't know in these rooms exactly what they look like. But we know enough that we feel pretty good about our best guesses. So for this room, all the chairs, the tables, the candlesticks, everything you see is from the 1700s. Now it's not necessarily the things that were here in the 1700s. Like this long bench was somewhere, whether it was here or not, I don't think we'll ever know. But something like this was here, and for all we know, this bench could have been here. But we just don't have records to tell us for certain. So my example I like to use here, this being a courtroom, is the books you see on the table behind me here are law books. They're all original law books printed in the 1700s. Now, did any lawyer ever look at this book in this room? No way I could ever know that, but they could have, because it's exactly the books they were referring to in those days. So again, everything is recreated, which leads me to one last thing about this room, and that's the cage in the middle of the room here. This is a reminder that before we were the United States, we were British colonies. And in a British courtroom to this very day, if you are on trial accused of a crime, you are standing in what they call the prisoner's dock. Now, you are innocent until proven guilty, and you have a lawyer, and you have a 12-person jury. Most of that we're doing in American courtrooms today is British. That's what we came from. But the fact of the matter is, this is something that disappeared from American courts. Maybe not all at once, but slowly, by the early 1800s, it just sort of fades away. But it is something they still use today in Britain. So it's one of those signs of things that have changed. And obviously the story of this building is not that it was the capital of Pennsylvania, but that this is the building where the United States was born. And that's the room across the hall that we're about to go and see. But before you leave this room, Make sure you get a good look, make sure you take any photos you want, and then whenever you're ready. Right across the hall is where the United States is created, so let's check that one out next. Again, these British colonies. Excuse me, folks, let me just get out of the way here so you guys can take some pictures without me being in the way. And I'll just start off over here for a minute, like I said, so you can take some pictures. So this room is the room that we all come to see. This is where the United States was born. There are 13 tables in kind of a circle here. Now, the honest truth is, I do not know that we have 13 tables in this room. It's a guess. The reason that we guess it is because we don't know who sat where, but we do know there were 13 colonies sitting here. The Continental Congress is the very first time that all 13 colonies sit down in the same place at the same time. We've never really worked as a group. The colonies were all their own things. But this place, in the beginning of the Revolutionary Wars, when all of us sit together, every colony got one vote. That's what they decided, no matter how big or small. So making sense would be each having its own table. That's why it's 13. We also think they sat from north, and I'm north right now, to south, because that's the order they did things. Again, that would make sense if that's what they did. So we'll be looking at New England up here, New Hampshire, Massachusetts. No Maine yet, we don't have Maine. And at the other end would be South Carolina and Georgia with no Florida, because we don't have Florida yet. So in the middle is New Jersey, Pennsylvania, more or less, where we all are standing right now, with New Jersey about a mile and a half in front of you guys. So let's talk about George Washington. We kind of begin and end with George Washington in this room. He walked into this room in 1775 as a member of the Continental Congress at the age of 43. He was wearing a uniform, Virginia Colonel. George Washington was not a public speaker. He was not a guy who wanted to stand up and talk in front of a group through his whole life, the president and everything else. Not something he tried to do if he could avoid it. But he wanted to fight for this cause. So he wore his uniform to show that support. And he's one of the guys that's pushing for the creation of an American army. Because we're 13 colonies, but we're trying to get these guys like John Adams in Massachusetts. It's the same. Trying to get all of us working together because we're not going to get very far unless we can. So the first big thing they really do is create that army in June of 1775, and of course they'll end up picking George Washington to lead it. Now the thing is, we know how the story ends. George Washington leads the American army for 8.5 years. He's the one and only commander, and he wins at the end. Not a bad first big decision is who's leading the army. Now the reality is these guys are going to write a letter to King George and say to the king, you know what? We're still loyal subjects over here. We are fighting for our rights under British law, and we're asking the king to help, which is not going to happen. By 1776, the British have said, okay, guys, it's time to put your guns away and go home. Anybody in this rebellion is a traitor. If you're not supporting putting an end to this rebellion, we might even view you as a traitor. And if you're found guilty in that courtroom standing in that prisoner's dock of treason, it's pretty likely you could get a long jail sentence or a death penalty. So clearly the British are kind of had enough of this by 1776. But then you have books like Common Sense. Thomas Paine writes his book early 1776 here in Philadelphia, making the argument we don't even need the British. So the idea of independence is starting to grow, and that leads to July 4th, 1776. Of course, that's the day of the Declaration of Independence. So let's look at this Declaration clause. It is written by a fairly unknown, young, 33-year-old Virginian named Thomas Jefferson. He's not famous. He's working with Benjamin Franklin, who is ridiculously famous, one of the most famous men in the world, with John Adams, who's one of the most important men in Congress. But they like the way Jefferson writes, so they give him the job. Now, that Declaration of Independence, to us today, all men are created equal. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Big ideas, which are great. But these guys are practical. They're in the middle of a war. And on July the 3rd, 1776, the British invaded New York. 9,000 men landed on July 3rd. 200 British warships with 30 or 40,000 more soldiers are up there in New York on the 4th of July. So literally we're declaring independence there in New York. That declaration is written for a war. Now, we don't have to think that way 245 years later. But for these guys, it's all about the bottom half of the paper. All those reasons why we in Philadelphia are right and those guys in London are wrong. Because they're trying to convince you and me to support a cause. Or even better, to fight for a cause. The war itself goes on for 7 more years. And that declaration is one of those things that keeps us going for all those years. Now, here's the other thing they're working on at the same time. And chances are this doesn't excite you nearly as much as the Declaration of Independence. But it's the Articles of Confederation, which, chances are, if you ever think about it, you kind of remember it doesn't really work and it doesn't really last long. But it is something that started with Benjamin Franklin. And it's something that he wanted since the 1750s. He was trying to get the separate colonies to work together back when we were fighting against the French in Canada. So he kind of dusts off his old ideas, and these guys kind of realize that we're not going to get anywhere unless we work together. So we need some kind of a formal agreement, and that's what it is. Each colony, or each state, writes their own constitution, and then they sign this agreement, this Articles of Confederation. But the problem, I'm oversimplifying it, the big problem is, in a lot of cases, you need all 13 states to agree. And you can kind of figure how that's not going to be easy. Just imagine our 50 states today. How different we've all been over the last year or so. And if we all had to agree on something, would anything ever happen? And that's how some of these guys feel. John Adams says it is almost impossible to make 13 clocks chime at the same time. And there are votes in this room where 12 states are going to vote yes, and 1 state is going to vote no, and 1 wins, because you literally needed all 13 to agree. So in other words, things don't always get done, they don't always get done quickly, people get frustrated, as you can imagine. So ultimately, by the end of the war, you have this growing belief that what we need is a national government. We don't need to be 13 states. And now, honestly, I don't think anybody thought we were going to be 13 little countries. But, think of New England going one way, the South going another way. Who knows what happens in the middle? And 3 or 4 little countries that don't get along is certainly a possibility to these guys. And so again, the guys like Washington feel that we need to be all together, convince folks, and a lot of younger guys, James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, convince folks that we need to sit down and kind of talk about the future. And that's back to this same room. May until September 1787, they called the Grand Federal Convention. We all know it as the Constitutional Convention. This is the United States being invented. The United States as it is, as it will be, is that Constitution that they write in this room. So, just a quick word on the Constitution. It is 4 pages long. So, we've been hearing a lot of bills and all going through now. Infrastructure bill, you might remember hearing about it in the news a lot. That is 3,000 pages. The Constitution is 4. So that's one kind of remarkable part of the fact. But the thing is, these guys had to figure it out. They had to invent this system. Now, I just kind of want to pick one quick thing. And what I'm going to do is show you 2 states, right? So this is Delaware. Again, we think this is where Delaware's at. And this one is Pennsylvania. Now, picture in your mind Delaware and Pennsylvania. And no offense to Delaware, Delaware is very small. Delaware basically says, we're not agreeing to anything where every state doesn't have an equal say. Now, if you're Delaware and you're small, logic. Pennsylvania, on the other hand, is going, okay guys, see, here's our problem. We have 15 times more people than you do. How's that working for us to have the same say as you guys? So the bigger states, Pennsylvania, New York, Virginia, what they're saying is we need to vote by people. In fact, the words, we the people, are written by a man from Pennsylvania named James Wilson, who would always tell you popular vote is how we should decide everything. He once said that, are we building a government for men, or are we building a government for those imaginary beings called states? Now, from the small state point of view, Pennsylvania, New York, Virginia have all the people, so they're going to run things. The big states have all the power, so the little states want to go by state. And they let go around for like 6 weeks on this one. And honestly, a lot of people feel like, well, there's no common ground, we're never going to figure this out. So what do they do in the end? Is they try to do both. So you think about the Senate, every state is equal, just as Delaware won. But then the House of Representatives based on people, more like what Pennsylvania won. And I'll even go so far as to say, how about the Electoral College? From that viewpoint, it's the same idea. In the Electoral College, every state gets counted. The bigger the state, the more votes they get. So we're trying to make both sides happy. But in a close election, it might come down to Delaware, and there are 3 electoral votes. So every state matters. So we're trying to make everybody happy. But as we all know, when you try to make everybody happy, you never really do, because nobody ever gets everything you want. And so we had this room full of guys at the end of that convention going, well, you know, I really like the big idea. And I love this part, and I'm okay with this part, and I'm even good with this part, but this one over here, I just can't get my mind around. So Benjamin Franklin, who was 81 years old that summer, came in the very last day with a speech, and he started off saying, you know what, there's things in this Constitution I do not approve, but I'm old enough to know I'm not perfect. None of us are. We should all, Franklin likes to give advice, we should all doubt a little our own infallibility. He says we should all sign. I do not expect anything better than this. And I mean, honestly, 81 years old or not, who's arguing with Benjamin Franklin? So, September 17, 1787, they signed our Constitution. Now, one last thing I want to show you guys today. If you look to the very back of the room, you will see a chair. This chair is the one and only thing I can show you today that is exactly where it is supposed to be. This is original to this place, made in the year 1779 for the Speaker of the Pennsylvania Legislature. When they wrote our Constitution, this is where George Washington sat. He was the man that led them through that summer, and he sat in this chair. And one of the reasons we know he sat in this chair is because Benjamin Franklin told us so. The day they signed the Constitution, Ben Franklin said, look behind George Washington's head. There's a target of a half sun. Franklin says, all summer I've been trying to decide if that sun is supposed to be rising or setting. He just couldn't quite figure it out. But that day they finished, Franklin would say, now I have the happiness to know that is a rising and not a setting sun. So here we stand 234 years and 10 days later. We are looking at the same sun on the same chair in the same room. We are using the same Constitution that they wrote for us, the same government that they created for us. And today we stand here better. And I'll give you 2 quick examples. One is slavery, and 2 is women. They discussed slavery in this room, but had no good answers and put it aside. Women, I'm sorry to say, on the other hand, they did not discuss for a moment. So you guys were totally left out of the process. Then we think forward through American history. That's 2 of those stories we carry through us. Slavery comes to an end in 1865. It's not the Civil War, it's the Constitution, 13th Amendment. Women had to wait until 101 years ago. The 19th Amendment, giving women the right to vote. So that Constitution has allowed us to continue to grow, which when you go back to Franklin looking at that sun, does sound an awful lot like a rising sun at the end to me. Now, I know there's another tour behind us, and they're going to want to get their turn in here, so I want to make sure you guys can take the photo. Is this somebody's water bottle? You recognizing that one? Nope? Okay. Somebody will realize they don't have it. So, if you want to get any photos, make sure you do. We're going to be exiting to the front door, which is to the right. I'm going to kind of get out of the way for your pictures. So if you have any questions, actually, you know what? We'll exit the back door.